Okay, so yeah, I wanted to talk about Notes from Underground, and I'll do a broader, not necessarily a broad introduction on Dostoevsky later, but so this book, it actually is his first major work. Or at least now we consider it his first major work. After going to prison and then getting out and stuff, which I'll discuss a little bit later. But when he came out of prison, he encountered on the literary scene through his literary journal and stuff several writers who were kind of the ideological children of the liberal class, the upper class intelligentsia liberals that he had been a part of. Now these are the progressive children who don't just want to reform Russia; they want to radically alter it. Like they are the rationalist, atheist, egotist socialists. And one of the main guys that he would go back and forth with is a guy named Chernyshevsky, who wrote what's possibly the most influential polemical novel in world history, which is What Is to Be Done, which was Vladimir Lenin's favorite book. It wasn't a philosophical treatise. It was a novel about how utopian socialism might work. And so Dostoevsky's like, no, I don't know that that's true. Your heart might be in a good place, but I don't know if that's true. You haven't really thought through it all. And so in that book, men and women, they're not driven by their passions. They're driven by the new Enlightenment reason, which of course leads to kind of a determinism, because why would you make any irrational choice, right? What's up?
So when you said he was part of that upper middle class, that was pretty communist or something, right?
It's not communist yet, although they would definitely come out of this. And even the previous upper class liberals, they were still they could still at least claim on the surface that, oh, we love Russia, we just want to reform it. These are now starting to push radicalism. Let's get rid of everything, all the structures and traditions and stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, please. But in this book that he's responding to, which this arguably is a response directly to that book, because in it, there's men and women. They're not driven by passions. They're getting rid of all traditions because they don't need them. They can guide themselves by reason and stuff. And reason it necessarily leads to egotism, all right, which they see as a good thing, all right. If there's no transcendent values, which that was the major shift at the time, then what should you live for? Well, you should live for yourself. They considered that a good thing, which, when lived out universally, will organically lead to a wonderful atheist socialist utopia. Ironically, this is one of the core premises of Ayn Rand, the emigrant from Russia. Her, even though, good job, Rand, going through, yes, capitalism and stuff, but some of her characters don't work because she accepts the premise of, godless atheism and egotism. And
so she was influenced by him.
She'll claim she wasn't, but it's you're accepting the same premise as the guy who birthed the movement that you wanted to stop. So Dostoevsky would have been okay, yeah, you're missing the point. You can't just claim to be yay, capitalism, while accepting the premise of that led to socialism. Anyway, so some of the core scenes from Notes from Underground, actually, the underground man imagines bumping into an officer and proving himself, and then also his treatment of the prostitute Liza. They're parodies of scenes from that one book. So while we can read this on its own and stuff, he is writing into a conversation going on. Now, because of the government censors and stuff, they couldn't talk openly about politics, so they'd have to put it into literature. That's why the Russian novel became the Russian novel. It has philosophy, politics, everything in it. So now, this book, the reason we consider this his first great work is because this is where he first perfects or first uses his tactic of dealing with those new ideas. So he would not meet them on a logical level, because that would assume their premise that, reality is all based in rational logic. What he would do, instead of meeting them with a different argument, he would take their ideas and he would show them to the fullest extent. He would show what is it going to look like psychologically if someone applies these ideas. And the underground man, with all of his neuroses, all of his contradictions and stuff, and then later on his treatment of people is that. It's like, I'm taking your ideas, not my ideas. I'm trying to show them in this character. Right? So now the basic plot of the story, if you can call it that, is it starts out, so it's all in a journal after some reflection. He talks about his ideas and kind of sifts through like the philosophy of rationality a little bit. Like it's very confused, which that's the point. It's hard to, he can't apply an ideology that cuts off part of humanity, the transcendent and like Christian selflessness and everything, because he's trying to force himself into that. It's a very confused thing. And then he later on, he invites himself to a party with the guys, but then he sulks in the corner most of the time, and then he gets mad at them for not recognizing his brilliance because he's a very thoughtful man and stuff. And then out of resentment for that, he goes and basically abuses a prostitute. It makes her think that he's going to redeem her and marry her, and then he just treats her like trash. And so those are not separate things. That's Dostoevsky saying, hey, this in action looks like resentment and manipulation. And like many times in Dostoevsky characters, their stated motives and their stated ideals and conscious what they think they believe isn't the actual, there's a lot more underneath it that they actually discover through their actions. Now, in what Joseph Frank, his biographer, he calls it a dialectic of vanity, the structure of the story. So a man, he reflects on certain events, and years later he isolated himself in his apartment and his job and learned this new ideology out of a sense of inferiority regarding other people. But then after he learned it, rather than treating them as equals, he was like, oh, well, I'm better than you because I know all these new ideas. I'm part of the new generation. And so then he treats others with contempt. But then when they don't respond like, oh, wow, you're a big guy, like, you're really cool. When they don't respond the way that he expects them to, he resents them and himself. And he seeks to displace it by like mistreating someone who's the lowest of society, which he fails. She successfully, she pisses him off because she is ultimately selfless in the end. She's still better than he is. Yeah.
This
is Notes from Underground. This is the general structure of it. Now, however, the underground man, despite his first line when he says, I am a sick man, I am a spiteful man, right? And despite all of the toxicity and stuff, he's not a bad person. He's not naturally vicious. There's many times where he has impulses towards Christian selflessness, right, and friendliness, but he keeps those things bottled up because he's trying to shove himself into this new set of ideas. And Dostoevsky's showing that it can't work. But rather than blaming the ideas and saying, okay, well, this ideology is not fully human, right? He blames himself, and so he internalizes it, and that makes him more feel inferior and stuff. Now, at the same time, he still he does take aim at certain aspects of the rational utilitarian and utopian vision of things. He's like, yeah, there's stuff in reason that it doesn't account for everything, and so he wants to devote himself to this ideology, but he sees problems, especially in the idea that the ultimate goal of this new ideology is not transcendence; it's bread, shelter, and sex, like meeting the physical urges of man, the physical needs of man. So if it's cool, I'll read a very popular section, or a very important section, where he is dealing with the idea of like, oh, the idea of utopianism, and like, oh, then all the crime, all the bad things will go away once we achieve this utopian vision and stuff. And his problem is not necessarily just with the socialism of it, it's with the idea that all things should be rationally seen and seen through like, well, what's your evidence? What's your That is the core thing that defines man. Shower upon man every earthly blessing. Drown him in a sea of happiness, so that nothing but bubbles of bliss can be seen on the surface. Give him economic prosperity, such that he should have nothing else to do but to sleep, eat cakes, and busy himself with the continuation of his species. And even then, out of sheer ingratitude, sheer spite, man would play you some nasty trick. So this is in a discussion of there's something other than the expected deterministic reason of man. There's something in him that can't be purely lined up with reason. He would even risk his cakes and would deliberately desire the most fatal rubbish, the most uneconomical absurdity, simply to introduce into all this positive good sense his fatal, fantastic element. It is just this fantastic dreams, his vulgar folly, that he would desire to retain, simply in order to prove to himself, as though that were so necessary, that men still are men, and not the keys of a piano, which the laws of nature threaten to control so completely that soon one would be able to desire nothing but by the calendar. And that is not all. Even if man really were nothing but a piano key, even if this were proved to him by natural science and mathematics, even then he would not become reasonable, but would purposely do something perverse out of simple ingratitude, simply to gain his point. And if he does not find a means, he will contrive destruction and chaos, will contrive sufferings of all sort, only to gain his point. He will launch a curse upon the world as only man can curse. It is his privilege, the primary distinction between him and other animals. Maybe by his curse alone he will attain his object, that is, to convince himself that he is a man and not a piano key. If you say that all this too can be calculated and tabulated, chaos and darkness and curses, so that the mere possibility of calculating it all beforehand would stop it all and reason would reassert itself, then man would purposely go mad in order to be rid of reason and to gain his point. I believe in it, I answer for it, for the whole work of man really seems to consist in nothing but proving to himself every minute that he is a man, not a piano key. So this idea of the thing that drives man, and this is he's writing this at the time when Darwinism was coming on the scene. It was being applied socially. And not just let's talk about how species adapt and evolve, but it was being shown, what is the thing that drives man? Oh, it's self-preservation, like the animals. Or, it's group preservation.
Survival.
And so, survival kind of thing. He says, no. The thing that drives a human being, the core ideal that drives us, is the desire to experience our own autonomy. Even if all good things are put forward to us and all the reason, this is why you should behave a certain way, if there's no feeling of choice that we have, no feeling of freedom, we will do the absolute irrational thing. Okay? We will spit in the face of reason. We'll commit suicide in some situations, rather than be slaves to either literal or imagined expectations. So that desire to experience our own autonomy, he saw as the fundamental aspect of man. And that was flying in the face of the Enlightenment view that, we are rational animals. Which I think is something. There's something to that, and I think his presentation of it is a misunderstanding of how Aristotle talks about it. But anyway, so he saw this principle of irrationality. I'll talk about it a little bit at the lunch session. That he had seen it happen in prison. After a few parts, he is an unreliable narrator. Okay, so after a few parts laying out his discoveries and reflections, which he's still failing to apply, this new rationalist ideology, he goes on to describe these two story arcs. One, let's see. I already said that it would be wrong to read them as separately. So one, he goes to dinner he invites himself to dinner with some friends. They know, and it's really awkward. They're like, you never liked us. Why are you hanging out with us? And he's like, oh no, I love you guys. But then the whole time he's sitting pacing off to the side of the room. All right, and they're just they're just having a fun time drinking. They're going to celebrate this guy moving away. But then because they're not going to respond the way that he expects, he actually wants to ask one of them to duel him, so he could prove his grand heroism. Right? He has kind of a Napoleonic complex that Dostoevsky will develop this idea of the like sulking, overeducated, Napoleon-minded kid in Crime and Punishment. Although he's 40 years old, this character is 40. So he's been sitting in his ideas in his underground cell of an apartment for years, which is also one of the big ideas that Dostoevsky was like, okay, no, you need other ideas to filter your ideas. I'll get into that later. But then it doesn't go as planned. They don't see him as some heroic grand gesture guy, right? And so again, then he goes and kind of vents himself at a brothel on this poor 17-year-old. After manipulatingly describing how bad it is, he promises to redeem this prostitute. He says, I'm going to love you, I'm going to marry you. And then she comes to his house the next day, and then he just like, oh, I was lying. He shouldn't have believed me. It's this really vicious thing. But then she forgives him. She doesn't respond in a self-destructive way. I mean, it's not complete forgiveness, oh, I'm going to help you through stuff. That would later on happen in Crime and Punishment with Sonia, the Christ-like prostitute. Who redeems the main character. But she runs away, but after this moment of tenderness where she removes his ability to be magnanimous because she's more she shows him that her Christianity makes her more naturally selfless than the ideology that he had been told was the real way of redeeming people, the real way of achieving the Christian end of like caring for people. And so there's this disconnect, which I mean, that reveals to him that he didn't really want to help humanity. He wanted to aggrandize himself. And so Dostoevsky, he's showing that in the center of this big post-Enlightenment kind of rationalism, the point is not humanitarianism or utilitarianism or something. It's fear and viciousness. And smallness, right? And he would later, and then the character then ends expanding. Oh man, we all feel this way, right? Where sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. I don't know how much I believe his projection onto all of humanity because he is an unreliable narrator. So we are not the underground man, all right? Nor is Dostoevsky. But more than a few times he says stuff and acts in a way that. I can't help but be like, wow, I've been exactly like that. I have chosen ideals that and ideologies that would have limited how I see other people. I've let them come in between myself and other people, and then loving other people. Even when I picked the right ideals, like Christianity, I still haven't lived up to it, and I've been resentful. I've been mean because of that. I haven't been humble about it. I've been sick from invented slights, things that really weren't problems, but I made them problems by thinking about them too much. I've been spiteful because of that. I've done my achievements. I've been bookish, not because of a love for greatness, but sometimes out of a resentfulness for it. Like, oh, let me get ahead because I'm not good at hanging out with the guys. Which I mean, like anything, it's something to learn and just do. All right, if you're thinking of getting ahead, I'm going to get ahead by learning more. Okay, you're doing it wrong. So, I've wished for I've wished to do things out of an abstraction for humanity while missing the point, which for all the good arguments behind those kind of things, it's easy to miss the humanity of the person right next to me. I believe in this kind of thing with this federal program or this lack of federal program, really, more likely with me. It's easy to say that while missing people who benefit and rely on those kind of things. So yeah, I've looked at those kind of things without nuance. Now, the goal of all this, I'm not trying to turn this into some kind of accountability session, but just to show I can't just simply.
That's what repentance is for.
Yeah, I don't know. Do Orthodox even do that? He's our accountability partner, but more just pointing out. I can't just say, oh, he's one of Dostoevsky's villains. Well, that's one of Dostoevsky's great things is we all might be one of his villains, and so he. However, this book is not about individual personal evil or iniquity. It's about ideology. It's about how it's his, again, like I said, this is his first foray into the tactic of taking an idea and showing the physical and psychological effects of adopting it fully, and which he'll show later on. Right? He's the first in several characters who get physically sick because of ideas that they assume and the way and ideas that they take on, because it cuts off. They have to cut off parts of their humanity, and psychology precedes physicality in Dostoevsky's world because he's Orthodox. I learned of Orthodoxy, the spirit of it, through him. When I started learning about it, about the church formally, I was like, oh, wait a minute, this feels really familiar, because at the time I was reading a lot of Dostoevsky. And I've heard I'm not the only one like that, because and I'll talk about more of this over lunch, about how he came to this realization that Orthodoxy has the full view of humanity. It's not an ideology. Ideology is actually a copy or a fake of a real religion like Orthodoxy, because it requires you to cut off stuff from people and stuff. So that's what he's trying to get at here. Now, this is especially relevant because a lot of the premises of the ideology that he is pointing at, our world assumes today. Right? They assume a rational secularism. Oh, don't do it. You can be religious, but don't bring it into public life. We don't objectively believe in transcendent values kind of stuff. We just, those are, especially in our postmodernist world where like everything you think is an interpretation of certain things, so we can have different views, subjective views on things. There's room for discussion there, but one of the implications is that those things don't really exist, right? They're like your version of of like a transcendent heroism might be someone else's oppression, kind of thing. So I think our culture has assumed, Western culture has assumed all this because we haven't read Dostoevsky enough, right? Albert Camus said that the true prophet of the 1800s was not Marx; it was Dostoevsky. This is one of the books of why, because we are under the same ideas even after they've shown to be failures and to be just slaughterhouses for people. The ideas of like rationalistic, egotistic socialism. All problems will be dealt with once we deal with these physical things, and entertaining ideas of transcendence just enables oppression to happen, that kind of thing. So I want us to reflect on how, similar to the underground man, how have we, because it is a topic nowadays of like, we can allow ideology or viewpoints of the world to affect how we see other people and how we relate to other people. Oh, you think this, or you probably think this, and this, so I'm going to love you from afar.
On the internet all the time now.
Yeah.
Facebook is full of that.
Yeah, I had to get off Facebook because it would make me, I realized every time I went on it, and this was back in 2014, 2015, whenever I would go on it, I would be physically sick for a while afterwards. I mean, that was probably my comeuppance for being a hot-headed 20-year-old for a while. So I realized, well, I don't have any friends on here. I just have enemies. And so, but at the same time, like the idea of, okay, how can do I need to pay attention to what this person believes before I can really get close to them? Now there is prudence, right? Like I wrote a book about a guy getting canceled from his school for doing a certain interpretation, a regular interpretation of a Shakespeare play. So, I mean, we don't want to, as it goes, I shall not speak of thy mysteries to thine enemies with God, but at the same time, I mean, we're called to love our neighbor in the lowliest and pray for those who want to destroy us. So how can we not, as we do our work, I'd like to reflect on, okay, where are ways that I've allowed what I think people think get in the way of me interacting with them or loving them? How has ideology, which he later on treats it as a demonic possession, as a kind of like full taking over of your ability to see the world that blinds you. He actually has a book called The Possessed, and it's about a socialist revolution 50 years before it happened in Russia. He predicts it exactly how. And the ideas behind it and stuff. It's a wild book, but it's also a kind of comic because they're idiots. And so, meanwhile, his book The Idiot is about a perfectly Christ-like man. So it's about someone who they think a perfectly Christ-like man is an idiot, but actually it's like, no, this is how we should live. Yeah. And so I'd like to think about how is ideology impeding our way of loving actual people? What should be the Christian response be? Like prudent, but also like demeanor, impulse, attitude, those kind of things. And then also like, how can we humble ourselves before sometimes an author putting the mirror up to us? So thank you guys for listening. I know I kind of went long. So I'll do a broader discussion about Dostoevsky himself and how he came up with this idea, and later on some of his other books, because this really is the doorway to his great works and understanding why he's so, frankly, depressing. It's not that he's depressing, it's that the ideas he's trying to deal with, he's like, no, like this is a bad idea. So anyway, I'll talk to you guys later on. Thank you for listening.